For joining the April 28th, 2020 Ogden City Council meeting. Please let the record reflect that all council members are present. We thank you all very much for joining us virtually in this time when we can't be sitting in the room together. So this evening we have several public hearings on our agenda. And so I just want to clarify that we will be taking open public comment on each of the items, but it is separate. So every item that's on the agenda will have a separate opening for public input, and then it will close. So maybe just pay close attention to which item we're on so you'll know if that topic is the time that you want to join with the comment. Certainly, if you have comments about every one of them, you're welcome to do so. We do ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes, and we'll put up a timer for those items while you're speaking. State your name for the record, and we do appreciate it if you're able to put your video on. Of course, if you're just calling in by phone, you wouldn't be able to do that, but sometimes that is helpful. So I think
Chair Chaburka, if I may interrupt, I'm so sorry. So the public hearings, we would just be unmuting them. There would be no video regardless of if they're calling in or joining us via Zoom.
Misunderstood. Thank you. Well, I was just going to say, Brandon Garside, our communications manager, will talk to you a little bit about how you indicate you'd like to make a comment. Would you like to cover that, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Chair Chaburka indicates that the time is appropriate to share public comment, you would raise your hand digitally, not literally. So to do that, at the bottom of your screen, there's an option to, if you're joining us via Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, there's an option to raise your hand, and that'll put you on the top of the queue. If you're, and then we will just go through in order of who raised their hand first. And if you're joining us via telephone, however, to raise your hand, you would need to type *9 into your keypad, and that will raise your hand. And then as we go through, you will hear the Zoom lady's voice. We'll call her the Zoom lady, saying that you are unmuted, and then your 3 minutes to share your comments with the council will begin.
Okay, thanks so much, Brandon. If you have any questions, maybe you could, I don't think they can chat, right? So we'll figure it out. We'll try to give ample time for you to figure out the technology and raise your hand, and make sure you have an opportunity to participate if you'd like to. So the first item is the 5-year consolidated plan and annual action plan amendments. This is a continued item from April 21st, 2020. And we're going to have a presenter, Ward Ogden and Kathy Fuentes from the Ogden Community Development Department.
Greetings, this is Ward Ogden, and I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Let's see if there's a, oh, here we go. And let's see if that works.
Something is happening.
You got it?
You see, yes, we do. You may want to change your presentation mode, yeah, so that we don't see the slides that are coming, but have the full screen.
Slideshow, here we go. Okay, very good. Last week, we began a public hearing, and it was continued to this week. The purpose of that public hearing is to adopt 3 changes. 3 items are being changed. The first item is a citizen participation plan amendment, number 1. The second is a 5-year consolidated plan, amendment number 2. And the annual action plan, amendment number 2, is the third item. The citizen participation plan is the document which outlines the procedures that whereby we involve the public in adopting our consolidated plan and our action plans. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, HUD is offering, Department of Housing and Urban Development is offering and suggesting that we make a modification, a temporary modification to our citizen participation plan. The first item is that it reduces the time for public comment on the published notice from 30 days to 5 days. And this basically provides an opportunity for the city to fast track the process to getting money out to the small businesses that we're trying to help. The second one is that it allows virtual meetings instead of on-site and in-person meetings. So that's, of course, what we're doing right now. And the consolidated plan documents are available online instead of having to go and find hard copies. So those are the changes to the citizen participation plan. The 5-year consolidated plan changes, just one change. Due to the pandemic, there is a designation of, it's kind of like a disaster designation by the federal government, which allows us to use an urgent need certification for the use of our community development block grant. That basically provides an easier and faster way for us to get the money out to the small businesses that we're trying to assist. The annual action plan amendment basically does the same thing. We have to have the urgent need certification declared that we're going to use it. We have to put that in our 5-year plan and our annual action plan. So that's one of the changes to the annual action plan. And the other changes to the action plan are to bring in additional money that has become available through loan repayments and the sale of homes. We put that money back into the budget so that we can use it. We're also reallocating $350,000 from other line items and putting that into the small business loan program to help the small businesses. In addition, we're bringing new money in to special economic development program from business loan payoffs. And then from the sale of homes, we're bringing in $446,000 to Quality Neighborhoods program, $54,000 into the HELP program. And because of the new money, there's also an increase to the block grant and the home administrative amounts. So those are the changes. Again, we talked about those at length last week. And so if there's any further questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from council members? I don't see any movement to the computer. Great. Okay, so for this item, we're going to take public comment. So I have to go back up to the right space. So if there are any folks in the community that would like to make public comment at this time, please raise your hand as Brandon indicated for your different devices or the different way you're logged into the Zoom meeting. Looks like we're all clear, Brandon. I don't see anybody that's indicating they'd like to comment. Just to verify.
I'm seeing the same.
Thank you. I just want to make sure. Thank you so much. So would anybody, I think we need to make a motion to close the public hearing, right? Or do we need to first, nope, I think for these items, do we want to talk about the budget as well?
I'd be happy to answer any questions I could. This is Glenn from the council office. As I mentioned in the work sessions that you heard last week, the budget amendment tracks along with the annual action plan budget amendments. The budget, the item 3 on there is the city side budget versus the HUD budget, which is what you heard about with Ward a minute ago.
Thank you, Glenn. So there's 3 separate action items we have. If anybody would like to I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, the council does need to close the public hearing on that.
I was about to do that. I would make a motion that we close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Heyer and a second by Councilmember Lopez to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, thank you. So now I'll be happy to take motions.
Chair, I would make a motion concerning resolution 2020-9. I make a motion that we adopt that resolution.
Second.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Heyer, a second by Councilmember Lopez to adopt proposed resolution 2020-9. That is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Nadolski,
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer,
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens,
Aye.
Councilmember White,
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair,
Aye.
Chair Chaburka.
Aye, thank you, and that passes. Would anybody like to?
And
Oh, please.
ready for a motion? I'd like to make a motion to adopt the fiscal year 2016-2020 consolidated plan amendment number 2.
Second.
All right, thanks. That was a race. A motion by Councilmember Lopez and a second by, I think it was Vice Chair Blair that was first. I could be wrong. I apologize, Councilmember White. And this is for proposed resolution 2020-4. And that is a roll call vote.
Councilmember Heyer,
Aye.
Councilmember Lopez,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens,
Aye.
Councilmember White,
Aye.
Councilmember Nadolski,
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair,
Aye.
Chair Chaburka.
Aye, thank you. And that passes as well.
Chair, I'll go ahead and make that motion again now to adopt both ordinance 2020-14.
Thank you.
Second.
So we have a motion by Councilmember Lopez and a second by Councilmember Heyer to adopt proposed ordinance 2020-14. That is also a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lopez,
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens,
Aye.
Councilmember White,
Aye.
Councilmember Nadolski,
Aye.
Councilmember Heyer,
Aye.
Vice Chair Blair,
Aye.
Chair Chaburka.
Aye, thank you very much. That one passes as well. So now we have the bond parameter resolution for water, sewer, and storm utilities. And the presenters are Brandy Johnson, Ogden City Treasurer, Laura Lewis, Fred Philpott from Lewis, Young, Robertson, and Birmingham. And then bond counsel is also present. Oh, wait, sorry, Blake Wade and Randy Larson. And then also bond counsel Gilmore Bell, possibly.
All right, I'm Brandy Johnson and I'm the city treasurer. And on behalf of administration, I ask that you consider adopting the proposed bond parameters resolution 2020-5. This resolution authorizes the issuance and sale of no more than an aggregate principal of $58 million under the following parameters. With no more than $41 million for the water sewer projects, $12 million for storm drain projects, and $5 million for the refunding of the Series 2012 and 2013 storm revenue bonds. Bond maturity will be no more than 31 years. Interest rates not to exceed 5.5%. Pledged debt service on the bonds will come from utility fees and shall not be sold at less than 97% of the total principal amount. Under the terms of the proposed parameters resolution, a pricing committee is authorized to make final decisions regarding the terms of the bond issuance. The pricing committee exists of 6 members and includes at least 2 officers being from council. I will now turn the time over to Fred Philpott and Laura Lewis with LYRB to discuss the utility rate structure objectives and the financing plan.
Thank you.
All right, Fred, are you, it looks like you're logged on. Maybe you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right. Okay. So thank you for having us this evening. I'll start the presentation by reviewing the utility rate analysis and then turn the time over to Laura to discuss the details of the parameters resolution and bonding scenarios. I will see if I can share my screen here. Is that something I can share on my end?
I think so. At the bottom of the window, it has share screen.
Okay. Can you?
Yes, we can see it.
All righty. So, as Brandy mentioned, we started the process by updating the utility rate analysis for each of the enterprise funds, looking at these primary objective with regards to financial performance, looking at revenue sufficiency within each utility, ensuring that we're monitoring cash reserves with a goal to reach 360 days, measuring a minimum for each of the utility, with water being at a minimum of 150 days of cash on hand with a target of 180 days. And then also layering in debt options strategically with regards to funding of capital improvements. When we layer in debt with regards to existing and proposed future debt, we also measure your debt coverage ratio with a goal of having 2 times coverage for water, a minimum of 1.5 times debt coverage. In essence, that's evaluating the net revenues you have after paying operating expenses relative to that debt service payment, or the combined debt service payments for each of those utilities. As we looked at each of the scenarios, we did have to make some adjustments with regards to current economic conditions and some of the impact of the coronavirus that we're facing. As a result, the models, we've removed any rate increases for fiscal year 2021. However, we are maintaining inflationary increases for fiscal year 2021. And the model also projects additional inflationary increases thereafter. As I mentioned, we've layered in bonding scenarios to mitigate the spend down of cash balances and fund large capital infrastructure. This has been addressed within the model. We're looking at bonding within the Water Enterprise Fund, the Sewer Enterprise Fund, and the Storm Enterprise Fund. The projects are listed here and also in the council packet with regards to the proposed projects that could be funded under each of the utilities. And these charts illustrate those benchmarks with regards to cash reserves. As is shown for water, we stay above our target until year 2024, and then we fall below the target amount. Similarly, in storm, below there, that water cash reserve chart, we have a similar decline, falling below our target amount, whereas sewer and refuse, sewer stays above our target through the 5-year plan horizon. Refuse, we're spending down some of the cash reserve to fund capital equipment, but we begin to regain that cash reserve over time. What these charts are indicating is without potential future rate increases or adjustments to your capital improvement plan, you will continue to spend down cash reserves within the water, storm, and sewer enterprise funds, and you may fall below those target amounts. So in future iterations of the analysis of utility rate updates, we will continue to evaluate your cash reserve relative to the capital improvement plan and present those scenarios to you.
One question.
Yeah.
I noticed that your cash reserves, it reaches a point in 2024. If we have a increase in our rates, that line changes, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah, and that's the idea, that as you continue to evaluate the enterprise funds, it may require additional action in the future with regards to either adjustments to your capital improvement plan or rate increases. But for the purpose of this analysis, we've just looked at what would happen if we only perpetuate inflationary increases in the model.
But Fred, you're trying to maintain the current capital improvement plan with that, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And by way of reminder, the current capital improvement plan is to replace 1.5% of the pipe per year. It takes a long time at that rate to replace all of your pipe, and you have pipe that's already 90 years old that's in the ground. So certainly, the good news is it doesn't have to be, you don't have to decide today on your, the next phases of your capital improvement plan. We're seeking to fund what's identified as what can be completed in a capital improvement plan now within the next 2.5 years. And we're funding that, and the funding of that does not require any additional rate increases above, the what you'll capture in terms of inflation. So it's important, Doug, I think, to pay particular attention to that. The flexibility that you and other council members will have in the future will be if you want to continue on that capital improvement plan, or if you don't, that would be one way of dealing with future rate increases, or you'll need those future rate increases if you're going to stick to that capital improvement plan.
So 2022 would be probably the first year we'd look at our rate study. Is that right?
Yes, that's what's currently contemplated.
Okay.
So the next slides then compare the debt coverage metric and ensuring that we're staying above our debt service targets. As you can see in each of the enterprise funds, we do stay above that minimum target. As Lars indicated, the proposed analysis and scenarios that we've looked at are showing that the inflationary increases are funding the current capital improvement needs as well as the debt coverage metrics. As we look forward into additional stages of the capital improvement plan, the council will have to evaluate strategies to fund those future phases. But the debt coverage, we're staying above those target amounts for each of the enterprise funds.
Can someone review debt coverage? We may have some citizens listening in and they may not understand what debt coverage is. So just could someone briefly review what debt coverage is?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. When we as typical consumers go in and apply for a loan, one of the things they look at is what your income is compared to what your various payments are. They might look at your mortgage payment and your car payment if you're applying for a new car loan, let's say. They might look at your other outstanding obligations, and they compare that to what your income is that you're giving them a history of. So this is similar to that on a grander scale with more zeros behind it for the city and the size of the improvement they need to make. And in this particular instance, what the rating agencies and market compare are your net revenues. So that's your total gross revenues that you receive from everyone making their water and sewer and utility payments. They compare what you receive annually. They subtract out the operational costs, and that gives you the net revenues. They compare that net revenue to your total debt, and come up with a ratio. The minimum ratio that you have to have, you're legally obligated to have, is 1.25 times coverage. We have in the model tried to beef that up so that the city gets to a 2 times coverage, and in so doing, you're able to put more money aside for cash-funded capital. You can build up your cash reserves for rainy days, like the rainy days we're having right now. And in having that kind of higher coverage ratio, you get a higher credit rating. And just like in the private sector, higher credit ratings lead to lower interest rate, and lower interest rates help immensely for the amount of debt that local governments have to issue in order to maintain their capital in good working order.
So the next slide, the proposed debt service is contemplated to be a combined security using all of the revenues from the water, sewer, and storm enterprise funds. And so we've also looked at a combined coverage. When we combine the revenues and the debt service, we stay under combined coverage, we stay above that target amount. And as Laura mentioned, that provides for a high credit and potential reduction in interest costs. So all of these metrics are pointing to positive, showing that we're able to utilize debt service strategically and capitalize potentially on current lower market rates and fund capital improvements. So I'll turn the time over to Laura with regards to the financing component and next steps.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions of Fred? I mean, he'll still be on, but just wondering relative to the summary of the utility rate study, if there are other questions.
I just have one. I've noticed in the year 2024, our debt coverage increases. Is there what's the reason for that? It seems like we go from maybe almost 2.5. So what's the reason for that increase in our debt coverage then?
Well, obviously we're, you're collecting more in anticipation of those future capital projects that you'll be contemplating issuing. The idea, if you maintain with the current capital improvement plan and pipe replacement, you would be issuing bonds again in 2022 or 2023. We would be adding more debt to that line, and that coverage is going to flatten back out.
All right.
All right. I don't know who's in control of slides. Fred, if you want to advance to the next slide, then that'd be great. So we've got a very good project list, detailed, sort of street by street of what's currently planned in terms of pipe replacement. We try to structure that so that there's some fluidity, no pun intended, with that if needed. If they start building and a pipe breaks somewhere else, that they can still replace that pipe with these funds. So it's not you're not legally bound once you issue these bonds to replace certain pipe on certain street, but you are bound to use it for the water, sewer, and storm sewer system improvements.
Laura, I totally laughed at your pun. I did.
It's always good to bring some levity into things, right? Especially with what we're dealing with right now. If the council chooses to adopt the parameters resolution tonight, we will proceed with the preparations of getting the bonds issued, get a rating. We have ratings meetings that we're seeking to schedule the week of Memorial Day, and we typically will get the rating a couple of weeks after that. The rating agencies are all currently barred from traveling, And I don't expect that will be lifted before then. They're all the entities that we go to. We're in the region where their offices are all in California, area that's very hard hit, and their colleagues are mostly in New York and some are in Texas. So we'll be doing it remotely, like we're having this meeting. That will be a first. I've done it with like one party participating remotely, but not typically the whole entire crew. The market, as you know, has been very volatile. So, you might have in your head, oh, can we even sell these bonds? The good news is that high-rated credits, such as this, the market has come back quite nicely. I didn't think to have Fred swap this out, but there's another table with more updated information that shows that the market for those high grades is getting quite steady. Rates have come back down. We hit an all-time low early in March, and then we hit the high for the year by the end of March. And people were sort of money was just fleeing out of the municipal bond funds, and you have the classic supply and demand, and so the pressure was on rates to go up. Those are coming back and settling back in. The FOMC is meeting today and tomorrow. The expectation is that the message that they will be carrying is, we're here to support the economy and talk about the tools that they still have to do that with. And, the goal being to try to settle everybody down. They've been a lot of discussions about how they can support the municipal market. So given the high credit quality I'm expecting of your bonds, I don't anticipate any reason that we would want to stop. But the reason we have the pricing committee is that once you have the hearing and adopt the resolution, if you choose to tonight, then we'll proceed forth, and that pricing committee would be who would be giving us final approval as long as we're within the stated parameters. This is a summary of the anticipated sources and uses of bond funds. We've got $44 million and change in estimated bond proceeds. 44 of that will be for project construction. The difference is for the professional fees, underwriting fees, a bond insurance policy. That's going to take the largest chunk of that. We will only put that in place if it gives us an economic benefit from a rate perspective. The debt service we have structured around your existing debt. That's why it increases over time. That all being done in effort to try to keep your rates as low as possible while moving ahead and allowing these capital improvement projects to move forward. As we see what the actual market rates are, we may, move, some of that principal around a little bit to try to, level that out even further. But this is sort of our first take at that, knowing that we, again, if your capital improvement program progresses, we will layer on more debt over time to this chart. I think Doug did a good job asking the questions and reminding us that, no rate increases beyond the inflationary increases are needed to support this issuance of bonds. I think, everyone is understandably a little nervous with what's going on in the market right now and doesn't want their hands to be tied for the future. The goal here is to finance the projects immediately at hand. We don't need a rate increase other than that inflationary increase to do that. And that will allow you the benefit of a couple of years to get those projects done, and then reassess and reevaluate whether the time is then right to make rate increases or to then modify your capital improvement plan. With that, we anticipate that we'll be closing. We currently have the week of June 15th with the rating agency meetings getting postponed a little bit. That may be a little bit later in June, but I don't anticipate much later than the end of June that we will close and have money for your projects. So we should have modified this slide. Sorry about that. You already set the public hearing date. You did that at your last meeting after we walked through this in a work session. That public hearing is for tonight. And then once that's in place or been handled, then you can take up the parameters resolution that Brandy summarized at the beginning of this presentation.
Thank you both. I just have one question. I was just curious, in this case, oftentimes when I hear about bonds being passed, the residents or the citizens of the community vote on that in particular, that bond. And so why in this case is that not? Is it because it's an enterprise fund?
Yeah, under state law, there are a number of bonds that can be issued without express voter authorization. The bonds that do require express voter authorization are general obligation bonds, also referred to by the acronym of GO, or GO bonds, they're sometimes called. And those do require a successful election of a majority of your constituents that vote. Bonds such as the utility revenue bonds that we're issuing, the city's not pledging to raise property taxes. If you were, again, that would trigger us over to a general obligation vote. What you're pledging is to the bondholders is that you will use the utility revenues of those utility systems to pay those bonds. That's the only thing that the bondholders have access to. And so that is expressly because of that you don't these don't go to a vote.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I have one, Chair. I'd like to go. I'm going to the counter event, and suppose that the bond market drops down even further. Are we tied into this calendar that you've listed here? To maybe take advantage of those prices, we may want to adjust that. Is there any leeway within our events that would do that?
Yeah, Doug, that's a great question. So there are a couple of ways that bonds can be issued. There's a method called a competitive sale. And then the method that we are using here and have used 90% of the time, probably in my career, is called a negotiated sale. So in a competitive sale, you pick kind of way in advance. You pick a day that you're going to market the bonds, and basically come heck or high water, you market the bonds on that day. And, for really, super high rated, frequent large issuers like, let's say the state of Utah, they typically only issue general obligation bonds. Surprisingly, and Angela, to your point, it's one of those things that kind of get in my craw, but whatever, I'll get on my soapbox for a moment. The state can issue general obligation bonds without the voters approving them, but local governments cannot. So the state issues their bonds. They frequently do that. Almost always do that through this competitive sale process. They put their, official statement out. They don't hire an underwriter in advance, and they just pick a day and they sell the bonds on that day. For less frequent issuers and for credits other than GO in particular, I think it's much better, and certainly in volatile markets like we're in now, to do a negotiated sale, because to your exact point, we have full flexibility. Once the official statement is ready to go into the market, once we have that rating, we can, go, let's speed up the sale and, we think this day is going to be good in the market, and we can advance it a few days. We can say, the market looks really crappy now. We can slow that down by, several days to a week or month, or not do the, the financing at all. That's why we have this pricing committee set up, so that they can decide. We'll give them, advice about when we should go into the market. We'll have a pre-pricing discussion about what the anticipated rates are. And then we'll move into the market. And if the market even moves away very severely from us on that day, we can still, pull the issue from the market, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's great information. The thing is that we either can save a lot of money or we can spend a lot of money depending on when we enter that market there. And we want to take the full advantage of when it's at the lowest peak.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I can't predict that with 100% accuracy, but we certainly watch it and try and get in as good a time as we can.
I thought you had a crystal ball there. You could.
Dang it.
Any other questions? Okay,
Hey, Laura?
Yes.
I don't know who. Laura, this is Marshall. Hey, I've got a question. Why is it that we're only seeking, while bond rates are so low, why is it that we're only seeking a certain amount of money? Is there, I guess that's my first question. And then the second question is, I want to make sure that we reiterate that Councilmember Stevens' constituents that have been talking to him, making sure that they understand that this is kind of slowing the need for rate increases. So, but my first one is, why don't we go out and get as much as we can right now while the bond rates are so low?
Another great question, Councilman. We have, there are several things that have to be considered in that regard. First and foremost, probably to get to, those constituents that you were just talking about, is we are cognizant of trying to maintain your rates in a band of affordability. That affordability is looked at by looking at your total. So again, it's sort of another ratio number. We look at the total average water bill compared to your median household income. And that's an affordability index. We try to stay in a reasonable band there. So that's one thing. Another thing that we have to take into account is how quickly can the proceeds be spent. With tax-exempt bonds, it is required by federal tax law that you spend that you have reasonable expectation of spending 85% of the bonds within a 3-year time frame. There was a time, we're not there now, that law came into place. There was a time when local governments could issue bonds at, say, 3%, and they could run out and invest them at 5%. Well, enough local governments, not in Utah, took a bad advantage of that and issued bonds without really any idea of what projects they were going to build, just to make that positive arbitrage. Federal government came in and slammed the brakes on that concept, and now requires that we have a plan in place to spend those proceeds. So those are the sort of the two driving reasons that we look at, your projects, what that does to the impact it has on your rates, and how quick your staff can get the pipe in the ground, literally.
Interesting.
Chair, I have a couple questions too, if Councilmember White is done.
Go for it, man.
Okay, thanks. I think my reservations are somewhat along the lines of what Councilmember Stevens has mentioned about potential for future rate increases to fund this. And your answer to Councilmember White's question kind of helped as well. But earlier you talked about the council maintaining flexibility through the CIP approval process. What I understood was that we would be able to look at what the individual CIPs would cost and balance that with what the rates would be needed in order to pay for that debt. Did I understand that right?
Yep, that's exactly correct. 100% spot on. Right now, if you issue these bonds, there will be no increases needed other than the standard inflationary increases that you've put in many years. So those are still programmed in at the inflationary rates. Other than that, to pay for these bonds and maintain your coverage, and the anticipation is to continue to keep very healthy reserves, which is something the rating agencies look at. No additional rate increases would be needed beyond those inflationary rates to do and pay for what we're issuing today.
Okay, so how is that flexibility hampered, if at all, by the response you gave to Marcia about the 85% requirement?
So the issue there is, let's assume that rates go to 0.5%, right? We could do if these bonds are 0.5%. Well, it would be very smart, to to the point of earlier discussion to say, gosh, we've got authorization here to issue 58 million, and to fund our projects, it was only going to be 55 million. Should we pick up that extra 3 million? Well, the answer is yes. That would, again, we'd want to be prudent, make sure we put that in, but at those lower rates in my fictitious example, it would probably, I can't imagine that 3 million at that low of a rate is going to move the needle in terms of your needing to change your rate, your water rates. So if we did that, then the next question is we turn to, Jay and Justin and say, okay, you've got $3 million more in my example, but you've got to look us all in the eye and say that you can spend that and get that pipe in the ground in 3 years' time. You've got enough, manpower, to plan for that and design it and dig up the pipe and put in the new pipe.
So what are our real numbers likely to be instead of a fictitious example?
Hold on, let me pull up your debt service schedule. Give me one moment. You can play the Jeopardy music in your head in the background. I said that to somebody the other day and they said, oh good, now you got that stuck in my head.
And I apologize if this has somewhat been indirectly answered in a different context.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
This is what I've been trying to chew on during the presentation and throughout the week.
Oh, there we go. So the current debt service schedule, let me get to the sources and uses here. I want to make sure all three were included. So currently we're planning on the deposit to the project construction fund of about 44 million. And that would fund all of the projects that have been reviewed, from the high level and pay the cost of issuance. So that includes, and I will probably need Justin or Jay to jump in here. I believe that includes the pipe replacement and improvements that are planned for sewer and water. Again, the storm sewer is a small element of that, and it's a refunding. The pipe replacement and projects for water and sewer for the next 2 years, it might be the next 3 years that's on your current capital improvement list. So Justin or Jay, do you want to chime in with that?
Laura, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now, yep.
Hey, yes, Laura, exactly what you said. Will be on the water. They'll be for 3 years on the water and on the sewer and storm as well.
Great. So Ben, again, to my example, we are planning today to fund those projects that you would be, funding those capital improvement projects over the next 3 years. Then if interest rates drop really low, we would, rally the troops and have a discussion of should we bring in, the projects that you have on your CIP plan in year 4. And they might say yes, but I'm going to say that's great, but I need you to not just bring them in terms of the dollar amount you plan on spending in year 4. You've got to look me in the eye and say that you can actually put that pipe in the ground within 3 years now instead of within 4 years. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does. This is just where I'm struggling with what decision do we make first? Because we've missed our window of opportunity, and it's something that we have been wanting to revisit for quite some time is our rate structure, but we never did, and so now we're revisiting the bond. And we're saying that in the future we might have to revisit the rate structure again. So, yeah, to me, I've just been trying to reconcile that.
Sorry. Yeah, so to be clear, you would only need to revisit your rate structure if you want to keep going down the path of your future capital improvement plan. So we'll get this funded. Those improvements will be in the ground. I'm no engineer. I'm assuming they're trying to attack, what is the worst pipe the first or the oldest pipe the first. They'll attack that. And if you decide to do no rate increases in the future, you'll be done with the capital improvement plan, until such a point that you probably can raise rates a little bit. So that's where your flexibility is. You don't have to raise rates. We're not locking you into that to do this issue. But you would have to, to keep with that, very reasoned capital improvement plan.
Sure. I appreciate the detailed response. My other question was, you had mentioned that when we get to that decision point, we have our current plan, summarizing your words, only accounts for 1.5% of our pipes per year, which was enough for us to replace them all in, within the projected lifespan of the infrastructure. But my understanding is that we're not even quite reaching that with our current approach. Is my understanding correct?
That's my understanding as well. I think that's due in large part to funding. There may be other issues, so Justin or Jay can address that. I do stand corrected. I said 1.5%. It's actually 1.2%. But Justin, if you want to take that question in regard to, are you replacing that much pipe per year now? And if not, why not?
Yeah. So going back from 2007 to 2017, for that 10-year period, we were about 1.2% on pipe replacement, as well as meeting the other needs of our water infrastructure. The last couple years, we have not met that same amount of pipe replacement. One of the reasons is we purchased the well field, which is something that needed to be done to protect our source water up there. So the last 2 years, we have not met that. And even with these bonds, we will still be under the 1.2%. However, some of the pipe we are replacing with these bonds are going to be, again, large diameter transmission lines that we're going to be replacing. And so that pipe costs more than if we're replacing and installing an 8-inch pipe somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Justin, can I ask another question about that? When you talk about 1.2% of the pipes needing to be replaced each year, you're not talking about 1.2% lineal. You're talking about of the value. Is that right?
No, we're actually talking like a lineal footage of pipe. It's just above like 20,000 feet a year is 1.2% of the system.
So if you are replacing large diameter pipes in really rugged terrain, it's going to really mess up that ratio, isn't it?
Well, it definitely costs more to do that.
Any other questions?
I have one. I noticed Laura mentioned the 3 years. And if we go if we have a recession between now and the 3 years, that 3 years, would it be possible to extend it to 4 or 5 years? Or is that 3 years just locked in? And if you go over that, then there's other consequences to follow. So how does that work?
The 3-year provision is a spin down provision. And Randy, I'm watching you on the side to make sure you don't start shaking your head now or something. Randy Larson's on with us from Gilmore Bell. The 3-year provision is a reasonable expectation that you will spend the proceeds. So, and we close as anticipated, and you have $44 million. Those funds are invested. We have to, keep track of, how they're invested and what they're invested in. They're held by a trustee. But when you close, there has to be a reasonable expectation that you will spend those funds within that 3-year period. So, if I think about if a recession comes, chances are that might be a good thing for you, because it might mean the price of pipe goes down. It might mean the price of some of your labor, your engineers go down. I would worry, probably, I don't know if it's a high worry, but, if supply chains are disrupted and you can't get, pipe, and that delays it. The nice thing is, this is where I'm watching Randy really careful. The law does allow that if there are, things that you didn't expect, it's a reasonable expectations test. So one example I can give you is, it's been many, many years ago, I worked on a financing in St. George where they funded the road that's kind of up above on the north side on that bluff, Dixie something it's called. Anyway, they borrowed a bunch of money, pledged Class B and C road funds, had the same obligation of the reasonable expectation was to spend all of those proceeds. And about, I don't know, 2.5 years into the project, quote, into it, quote unquote, they called and said, we haven't spent very much of this money. I'm like, right. But the issue was they ran into issues related to the desert tortoise, and they had to work those out with the various federal agencies because it was a protected species. And if you drive on that road today, you will see a little fence that you can step over. It's about 1 foot tall, but a tortoise can't get over it. So again, no one is going to say, oh, your bonds are going to be deemed taxable because of that, because they couldn't, foresee that delay. They didn't think the delay would, be that long to fix that. So here, let's say, again, worst case that, we borrow the money, you run into problems, you can't get pipe. There's no pipe supply for whatever reason, and that's delayed by 2 years, heaven forbid. But what has to be done is that has to be documented. Any delays, unnecessary, unusual delays need to be documented so that in the event the IRS ever comes calling and, audits your bonds to make sure you should have been issuing tax-exempt bonds, you can put that forth in front of them. And Randy, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, that was well said. As long as it's just an expectations test currently, if something changes, usually the worst thing that happens is you may have to restrict investment of those construction proceeds. So as long as you have a reasonable expectation to spend 85% of the proceeds in 3 years, I wouldn't be concerned about any risk to the city after that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So I asked the question again, Justin, are we able to increase that, increase those projects so that we can maximize the bond amount?
We have a very good plan laid out with the staff that we have, Marcia, and I think if the opportunity arose, I think we could figure out how to make that happen.
So go for it, Laura. Get as much as you can.
Right.
Maximum on that high end there.
Music to my ears.
Any other questions? I don't see any movement. I'm trying my best to read the room. Great. Thank you so much, Laura and Fred and Randy. Thank you. And Justin, I should say. Great. So now we will open the public hearing. So again, if you have any comments for this particular item, the bond parameter resolution for water, sewer, and storm utilities, please feel free to indicate that in the Zoom meeting by raising your hand or however Brandon told you to do so.